What's up, squad? Happy New Year. Welcome to the Adapt session where we have intrinsic combos on mindset, exercise, and life's ever changing experiences with your host, Joe, and
Mondo, oh shit, it's season two.
season two,
Welcome to
baby.
season two. Welcome to season two, y'all. I don't know how I got that energy. I was pretty sleepy before we started. But you know what? I'm actually really excited because we got one of my buddies over here, Dr. Nicci Abbott. I'm sorry, I've always called you Doc. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Season two kickoff was of Adapt session. How crazy is it that we're kicking out the second season, you guys?
How exciting.
I'm excited. It's crazy. 2021 about to be our year, right, everybody?
That's right.
Switching it up.
Yeah, 2020 vision is outdated, son. Let's get started, you guys. Let's give a background on Nicci. So you guys, if you guys are watching this video, you guys are going to notice that we're wearing the same sweater. I see you, Nicci. Joe's wearing it too in spirit.
Exactly.
SF State. She graduated a year before me. She is she's the only person I know that could pass biomechanics and exercise physiology and a whole bunch of hard ass kinesiology classes at the same time.
Oh, thank you.
We'll give you some stories later on about a lab instructor that she pissed off. But today we brought her on because she is starting to become a physical therapist. And one of the things that I started calling you towards the end of that semester that we took together was I actually started calling you Doc.
That's true.
And that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's been so.
So it's 2021 now. I graduated 2018. So yeah, going on 3 years.
Oh.
Wow.
Wow.
Time flies.
Time flies.
Right?
Time flies when you don't sleep.
Literally. The days are long, but the years are short.
Hey, that's true. That's true.
Especially when you're taking some of those classes that we took.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some really long classes.
I felt like I was there with you guys because every time I seen Armando, he was telling me about it. So I went there too.
Exactly.
Yeah, and not to mention, I brought him in a couple of times on campus, and sometimes Joe would ask me, he's like, dude, you look like you haven't slept in the last 3 days. Well, that's because I haven't slept in the last 2 days.
Finals.
Let's go work out.
Yeah, you guys do have a really nice gym there. It's really nice.
The sad part is it opened my last semester there, so I didn't really get to use it.
It wasn't there. It wasn't there when you were going to school there. That sucks.
No, it was being built, but yeah. So I did get like 1 semester's use out of it, but it was super nice.
Well, see, I feel like I'm like a full-time SF Gator myself because I got to use the gym and you didn't.
Exactly. You got a better experience than I did, and I got to pay tuition.
Oh, and you know what the crazy thing is, Nicci? I took one of the times I take Joe over to campus. He starts. So there's this pull-up machine that gives you assisted pull-ups, assisted dips. Joe didn't use the assisting, right? And he's doing these seated pull-ups, and he's just pulling himself up with ease. And people are watching him. Like there's a crowd starting to crowd around him. He's not paying attention. He's just focusing on his reps, and he's doing it like it's nothing. And everybody's just like.
So Armando says, I didn't see that, but
because you were focused on yourself.
Right. In tune.
Joe is a freak athlete, you guys.
That's awesome.
I'm all right.
Yeah.
To be honest, I've never been able to do pull-ups, so you're better than me.
Joe's different.
Appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But
we're here for neuroplasticity, my friends.
Yeah, let's do it.
So who better to have than my friend Nicci here, who is on her way to becoming a physical therapist. So if you guys get injured, she can put you guys back together. Or if you guys work with me and Joe, you can work with her to put you back together so you guys can come back to us.
Exactly. Teamwork.
There it is.
Yes. Teamwork makes the dream work.
There we go.
So let's get started with neuroplasticity. Nicci, can you
Yeah,
give us an overview of what neuroplasticity is?
sure. So I have a definition I put together for you guys. And so neuroplasticity can be defined as strong and frequent synaptic activation that leads to structural changes of those synapses, creating stronger or new pathways. It can also prune or get rid of old synaptic pathways that aren't frequently activated, which therefore means they aren't needed. So
Mm,
basically, neuroplasticity is just the way our brains adapt when we learn things.
I like that word.
like that. The way our brains
That
adapt when we learn things. Can it also can that also directly go with, let's say, not just learning something new, but going through struggles or challenges or adversity in our life?
um, I'm not sure if that would so much change the same structural pathways, but
Mm,
psychologically, I feel like it would have the same effects.
okay.
Yeah,
Can you explain to me what and explain to our audience what the differences would be between?
sure. So, really, with neuroplasticity, it's the neurons in your brain that are changing the way they grow, which neurons they communicate with, and therefore making actual changes in the anatomy of your brain. Whereas going through something like an adverse event would more, in my opinion, I'm not an expert, but I would more say that's like a psychological effect and it makes you stronger mentally, but maybe not so much changing the actual anatomy of your brain.
Mm, okay.
Yeah. But again, I haven't read research on it, so I could be wrong. That's just based off my own experience.
For sure, for sure. I think that's kind of cool because that'll get us into this next question that me and Armando had going on for you, um, which is age creates less pathways as we get older. Is that true or false, and why is that?
So on like a basic level, yeah, I'd say that's accurate. Younger brains are more plastic, which just means they're more moldable and impressionable, just like younger humans are.
Mm,
So as we get older, it gets harder to create new synaptic pathways. So as we get older, it gets harder to learn new motor tasks or whatever it is that we're doing. But we can combat that by applying some of the principles of neuroplasticity. For example, in like animal studies with monkeys, they found that by having high repetitions, so they would do like 600 repetitions, which is a lot. You can't really replicate that in human trials, but we could do the best we can.
mm,
But they found that repetition has a really profound impact on learning new skills. So just implying those type of things can combat the aging process.
mm. Okay.
It's kind of funny that you say that too, because um, I don't know if you took this same class. We did motor development, and we watched this video of this guy who created this strange bike. So if you turn the bike, for example, if you want it, so usually when you have a regular bike, if you turn the bike towards the right side, it goes right.
Mhm.
If you turn it towards the left side, it goes left. Well, this bike was constructed differently. If you turned it right, it turned left. If you turned it left, it turned right. So he would take this bike when he would do an experiment. He would go to the street. He would pay people to ride the bike, and nobody knew how. And the majority of the adults didn't know how to do it. And one of the things that he realized was that because he was older, he had to unlearn everything that he knew when it came to riding a bike because he would approach it as a regular bike.
Mhm.
So he had to unlearn it and learn how to manipulate the new bike.
Yeah, he had to prune out some of those old pathways.
But you know how long it took him to do it? It took him about 8 months to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, so it took some months to do it. So,
Well, yeah.
but he had a 5 or 6 year old son, and his son was learning how to ride a bike, a regular bike.
Mhm.
But then he decided to give him, he decided to make him the same kind of bike, and he was able to adapt to it like that.
Wow. Yeah,
So that's kind of like it kind of goes with neuroplasticity, right?
totally.
Where it's better to their brains are still developing at a younger age, so they're able to adapt. They're able to change up what they learned. When
Hmm.
you're older, you're too stubborn. You're so in your ways.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks.
There you go, right? So it was interesting to watch that clip because his son had no issues doing it. It only took
Hmm.
he did it within a couple of days.
Right.
Whereas for him, the man himself, it took him 8 months to unlearn it. But here's the funny thing is when he tried to ride a regular bicycle,
Hmm.
he couldn't do it because
Yeah.
he had to unlearn it.
Right. He had lost all of those old pathways that told him how to do that motor skill. And now he had pathways for a new motor skill.
Hmm.
That that was intriguing to me, and that was it's crazy how the brain works, and we still don't know enough about it.
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite part, the brain.
I just wish more people used it.
Question.
That's a whole different topic. Yes,
What? Go ahead, Mondo. Were you done?
I was just saying that I wish more people use their brain, but that's just a whole different topic.
Oh,
You saying?
okay. So, uh, that that kind of leads me to another question. So I actually got two. So one, is it possible to maintain a skill such as what Armando was talking about, learning how to ride a regular bike, right? And also learn a new skill such as the opposite bike, the one where you turn in one direction but it actually goes the other. Is it possible to get both of those skills down and maintain both? Or would that be too difficult for our brain to handle? And what would be the benefits of that?
Um, well, you're gonna hate me. The most popular term in physical therapy or kinesiology, as I'm sure Rhonda knows, is it depends.
Mm,
So it really depends on the person, but I would say like depending on how much they're training and practicing it, that they could probably get it down. One of the principles of neuroplasticity is transference, and that's basically training in one experience can enhance similar behaviors. So I would assume that riding the basics of riding a bike would transfer to either skill. And then it would come down to the specificity, which is another, I hope I said that right, another principle of neuroplasticity where you would just have to train for that specific skill in order to quote unquote master it.
mm,
But I would think it's possible. I mean, people play multiple sports, and I know when I was taking sports psychology that Dr. Boyd would mention all the time that playing multiple sports is really good for young kids' motor development, and it actually makes them better athletes overall than specializing in just one specific sport. So I would assume that, yeah.
I I agree. It does depend. But I'll do you a couple. I'll two things. One, I think it would also depend on the age. I think if you were in our age range, I mean, Nikki's a couple years younger than we are. But if you were to have someone around our age, then they'd have a harder time maintaining both skills,
mhm.
especially if they're learning the skill later on. I think that would be a little harder to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
Them
if
making
they're
that time.
if they're a younger kid, then I think they have a better chance of maintaining both skills.
Totally.
But we're gonna do this. But if I were to be honest, though, I would relate it to let's relate it to let's relate it to training. All right,
To training?
let's relate it to training.
Okay.
So let's say we're working with a bodybuilder who does a lot of isolation movements. Let's throw them into functional patterns. That would probably be out of their wheelhouse, wouldn't it?
I would say so.
So then reverse it and you put them into the functional patterns, they're moving better. They have more fluid movements. They have more control over their body. They're actually able to rotate. They're actually able to, their mobility is increased. But then you put them back into the isolation training, what's going to happen? It's going to be off, right? So I would say that it's possible, but I think that it would take time for them to adjust, especially if they're older. It's going to be even harder for them to do.
Yeah, definitely. Plasticity is just more readily available in younger brains. So in general, it's just going to be easier to have synaptogenesis and create the connections that you need. And also it depends. So like if you're riding the normal bike a lot more than you're riding the opposite bike, then you're going to be better at riding the normal bike just based off of the time spent on it, the repetitions on it, the specificity of it. But if you were riding them equally, then perhaps you'd be equally good at them.
Okay, that's really interesting, guys. Uh, now I got another question based on that. So let's say you're doing these things, Mondo, bodybuilding, functional patterns, Nicci, riding the regular bike, and then I'm going to say opposite bike, offset bike. Let's go with that. Um, are there any foods, and you know what, and just to be clear, everybody out there listening and watching, we're just using these as examples. There's plenty of other things that you could do, but we're just using these as examples. Are there any specific foods or nutrition that can help you build and open up these neurological pathways and synapses?
Yeah, flaming hot Cheetos with lemon.
is this is this something that's like talked about, within that field?
Um, in physical therapy, we don't typically get into nutrition too much just because nutritionists are the experts in that field. So we go over like the very basics of nutrition, to be honest. So I personally wouldn't be able to make any recommendations on that, but perhaps Armando.
The foods that are usually recommended are like oats, granola, berries.
I'm pretty sure omegas are good.
Omegas are good too. So yeah, usually
Fish,
those types. What's that?
like fish.
Yeah, a lot of. So hopefully you guys like sushi.
Okay, so is it fair to say that um, it'd probably be a recommendation of like fatty foods, lipid foods that the
It would
brain
depend on
can
the
get
type of
energy.
fat.
Okay, obviously
Or
healthier fats, right?
either that or a complex carb.
Okay.
So you want some berries, some like even raisins or cranberries, things like that. There's some more, I'm sure, that it's just off the top of my head. I'm not able to think of that, but we could probably come back to this some other
Okay.
time. Because
Yeah,
No, for
this is
sure.
this is not going to be the last time we had Nicci on here. I mean,
yeah, that's fun.
Absolutely not.
she's too smart, man. She's
Now we definitely got to have you on.
Yeah,
So
it's fun.
Doc, I guess okay. So enough of my questions. We're just gonna go with the next one, okay?
Keep them
which,
going.
which is okay. We just talked about how older adults have a more difficult time learning a new task or unlearning a task that they've been, or let's say a skill, right? I think that's a better way of putting it. Compared to younger kids, teenagers, they have an easier time unlearning skills or learning new skills.
Mhm.
So what's the difference between normal aging and pathological aging? How can you tell if somebody is too old, or not too old, but at an age where it's going to be more difficult, and someone else is going to be at an age where it's going to be a lot easier? Like, is there a certain spectrum that you have to follow, or how does that work?
And when it comes to like the actual number in general, I don't think there's like a specific value that you need to start looking around. I mean, typically we say like over 55 people are seniors, but that really depends on how well the person has taken care of themselves. So like normal aging is the cellular process that we can't stop. Like our basal metabolic rate slows down, our bones get less, or yeah, they get less dense. We lose muscle mass. Our kidneys stop filtering as well. Like those are all just normal parts of aging.
as well
Um,
as breathing capacity too. So that's another one too.
and then, or even like degeneration in your intervertebral disc, like that's normal. You lose the quote unquote water that's in your disc and they get smaller. So
Mm.
those are all just normal parts of aging. But then pathological aging are things, at least in physical therapy that we go over, would be like dementia, osteoarthritis, strokes. And so when somebody has a pathological condition affecting their aging, excuse me, that's when it gets a little bit harder to train them or provide rehabilitation. And that's when learning the new skills becomes harder. But that's also when neuroplasticity becomes more important, the principles of neuroplasticity and applying them in your training.
Can we just for our audience and then also for myself, can we go over what the principles of neuroplasticity are?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome.
Okay. So there's 10 basic principles, and a couple of them are very similar to each other. The first two are use it or lose it, or use it and improve it. And that's basically just saying without activation of these synaptic pathways, you're going to lose the brain function. And so you want to use it as much as you can. And by using it, you're going to improve it. And so that could lead to new pathways or stronger pathways. And then the next principle would be specificity. And that's just you want the nature of your training to be similar to the nature of the task you're performing. So if you're riding a bike, you want to practice riding a bike. Or if you want to be able to lift 500 pounds, you want to practice lifting 500 pounds. And then the next couple are just like basic principles of any training: repetition, intensity, and time. Repetition, from what I've seen in research, is the most important principle of neuroplasticity. Getting as much repetitions in as you can is going to really benefit the learning of that skill. And then intensity depends on how many times they get that right. So the way I like to think of it is a pitcher. Let's say they get 7 out of 10 strikes from the pitches they throw. That's a pretty good intensity. That means they got enough right where they feel good about themselves, but they also got enough wrong where they can learn from it. So when you're applying intensity into training or rehab, you really want to make sure that you're not overwhelming the client or the patient, but you also want to make sure that they do have room to make errors so they can learn from that error. And then time is just how long they're doing it. More time, better. Salience is the next one, and that's really just how can you make it interesting or how can you make it new to keep the client or the patient's attention, because the more the patient or the client is involved in the rehab, the more they're going to get out of it. And then age, and that's really just younger brains are more readily available for neuroplasticity changes. And the last two are transference and interference. Transference is how I was saying you can learn one skill and it can apply to a similar skill, like riding the bike and then the opposite bike. And then interference would be where you run into a situation that interferes with your learning, but helps you acquire a different behavior because of that. And so those are I think that makes up 10 basic principles of neuroplasticity.
Do you have an example for the last one, for the interference?
So maybe, for example, on like the football field, you're running a play and it didn't work out, but you found a different route to run that ended up working better. And so you chose that route instead. So something interfered with your original plan, but because of that, you found a new way to solve the problem.
Okay. So not thinking so linearly.
Right.
Okay.
Being able to adapt.
There we go. Hey. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess.
I see you, Nicci. I see you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mondo. You follow up.
You want me to follow that up?
Yeah.
You're tripping. Nah, man, she broke it down better than I ever could, man.
That was nice. So essentially, it's learning a new skill, putting it into action, and then all these other things come into place too, right? You don't want to overwhelm yourself. You want to make sure that you give yourself or your clients time to make mistakes to learn. I guess another word would be the learning curve, right? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, neuro rehab seems like really intimidating at the surface of it, but at the end of the day, it's very basic principles and just learning how to implement them in the right ways.
I got a really good question for you based off of what you just said. So, like, you're just making me think, and I like that.
Right.
Um,
She has
has
she has a way of doing that, bro.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like that. I like that. So with that being said, right, you want to make sure that you don't overwhelm yourself or somebody you're trying to help, like a client or a patient. You want to make sure the intensity is just enough so they can be challenged, but have room for error so they can learn. Has there ever been a time, I guess, within the physical therapy field and neuroplasticity where somebody may not be putting in as much effort, like let's say a patient that's rehabbing and you can tell that they can push a little bit harder? How would you go about dealing with something like that? Like what would be your advice?
I mean, in general, we're told to really focus on our patient language and like using language that would give them reason to want to participate. And so we're never going to force somebody to do something. But we may say, if you do this, you're going to be able to, like, let's say they're in early rehab for a stroke and they want to get home or they want to get out of the hospital. We could use that as motivation to have them step up their participation, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any real strategies. I mean, you could try making it funner, which I think the salience comes into play in that, and just finding ways to make it interesting. I mean, sometimes you go into a session thinking that you have this plan ready to go, and the patient's like, absolutely not. And
Yeah.
you just have to come up with something on the fly. So I think a lot of it is just being flexible,
It,
Okay.
being
it really is, because the truth is, a lot of these patients or clients that you're dealing with are either coming through a serious or traumatic injury, or they've had a kind of like an illness that's been very, very like traumatic as well.
Mhm,
So you're talking about like potentially torn ACL, or broken leg, torn Achilles,
mhm,
or even a stroke.
mhm,
So a lot of these people, like, and we can relate it to training too, because I volunteered, I've done hours at PT offices, and one of the things that I've taken from both our field and also in PT is that you almost work as a not just a physical therapist, but you're also working as like a psychiatrist in some ways,
counselor.
because you got to listen to them. You got to listen, because they're not going to come. They're hurting. They're not working the way that they used to, so they're not going to come in the best moods. So you got to be ready to adjust. You got to be ready for anything, right? So they might come in angry. They might come in just depressed, sad,
Mhm.
and it's up to you. And it's like it really is like being a trainer. You have to bring the energy. You have to be the one that provides the boost. So sometimes you're going to be, so if it's like when I was there, it was a stroke victim and he couldn't use the left side of his body. And he would just sit there and he was just feeling sorry for himself, and he wasn't really participating much. And you could see that he had made some kind of strides, but because he was so depressed, he allowed himself to take a step back. So when you have situations like that, you got to figure out ways to boost them up, maybe make them laugh a little bit. Help.
And part of our like initial evaluations that we do at the beginning of getting a patient and then at the beginning of every session is screening for things like that, screening for things like depression or fear avoidance or learned non-use. so that we can hopefully plan ways, like if we suspect something, especially when it comes to like depression issues, we really want to make sure that we're screening for potential serious issues so that if we need to, we can ask this person, like, hey, do you think you need a referral somewhere? Like, is there somebody I can help get you to talk to? Because, yeah, that's a really big part of the, I'm sure you guys see it as well, training people who have injuries. It can be really depressing when you are restricted from your normal participation activities.
Yeah, it can be. It can be they're so even when they're not injured, like sometimes some of the clients don't have the right attitude. They still don't look at, for example, like the three of us, when we look at a workout, we look at it as it's part of our lifestyle. It's part of who we are. To them, it's just man, I gotta do this workout. This is just like an optional part of the day.
Mhm.
So I think so that's something that we had to spend some time working with too, is we had to change that mentality from it's a privilege or a luxury or whatever, so it's something that they don't have to do to it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's the way you live.
Yeah, you have to give them like intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. So we gotta push them because they need that push, but at the same time you gotta also train them into believing that this is part of who you are. This is what I do here at the gym or what I teach you is like for that 1 hour, that's just part of it. It doesn't stop when you leave. It keeps going. So that applies to PT. Like so when you're dealing with all these people who are injured, stroke victims or just severe injuries, they you need to you need to really help them with the way they think because they might be if they're especially if they're an athlete, they're like, man, my career's over, my career's this. It's like, no, not necessarily. It's you gotta how motivated are you to recover from this? How motivated are you to bounce back? Like you gotta just be willing to put in that work.
I'd say a large part of it is minimizing catastrophic thinking, because
Yes.
I'm sure we've all been there. I mean, I had knee surgery when I was 15. And at that point, I had been playing softball for like 11 years. And immediately I was like, it's over. I'm never going to play again. It like, I have no chance. And so, I mean, even myself, like, I feel like I know a lot of the times where the patients are coming from because I've been there myself. So that's really useful to me, I feel. And I think,
Best thing that you can do is relate to them is from your own injuries as well.
right. So I feel like a lot of it is finding ways to show them how important these things are and that it's not just a short-term thing that's going to benefit them, but in the long term, it's going to be a lifestyle change or it's going to be something that really benefits them.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so kind of like coaching them up with pep talks. Getting them hyped up, like how a coach would get his players hyped up before a game. Get them
Sure.
inspired, right?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, with that being said, we mentioned a few times about talking to, let's say, stroke victims. So, how would you go about training them to start being or getting back to their independence, which they once had?
I mean, a lot of it starts with like basic things like just how to sit back up in bed or how to get from bed to the wheelchair. But overall, when you're in stroke rehab, a lot of it comes down to repetition. And unfortunately, in outpatient physical therapy, which is the client comes to the clinic or the office for their session,
Hmm.
um, we as physical therapists could do a lot better in how many repetitions we're providing those patients. So that's one area that we have started paying a lot more attention to. But then there's also acute care where you're in the hospital or inpatient rehab, such as skilled nursing facilities. And in there, they focus a lot on time and repetition, um, to go to an acute care facility, you have to be able to stand 3 to 6 hours of therapy every single day. Um, so a lot of the strategies come down to just the basic neuroplasticity principles.
With that being said, obviously we know that stroke victims, a stroke affects your brain, right? Is there is there any data that's been collected that shows it affects one side of the brain more than the other?
Yeah, so if you have a stroke on your right side, your impairments are going to be on your left side. I did that backwards. This is your left side, this is your right side. If you
Okay.
have a stroke on the right side, you'll have left side impairment. And then it also depends on what blood vessel in the brain is affected. So each blood vessel serves a different part of the brain. Most often, the middle cerebral artery is the one that's affected, and that's what controls your face, arm, and leg. And that's why the classic signs of a stroke are droopy face, unable to move their arms, slurred speech. So yeah, and then also it depends. So the middle cerebral artery goes over half of your brain, so you have one on each side. And depending where along that the lesion is going to depend on if your arm's more affected or your legs more affected, and so on.
Okay, so it's contralateral then, right?
Yes.
Opposite sides.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, with the PT exercises, let's say that um, are most commonly used, and I guess maybe you can educate us on that. Has there been a dramatic increase in cognitive function, brain activity, and them coming back from these strokes and basically almost going to normal?
Um, so I did find a little bit of research that was saying that physical activity modulates some of the underlying mechanisms of neuroplasticity. So, um, like synaptogenesis and those sort of things. So, uh, physical activity can prime cognitive training, but I personally haven't seen I haven't done the research, but I haven't seen a direct correlation between the physical training and the cognitive regaining, like the cognitive function of being regained. But there is, for example, when we're doing our assessments, we do assess their cognitive behavior. And there are things like memory games and things like that we can do to work on it. But in general, that's not our main focus with the strategies, but I do think the research shows that by working on the physical aspects, you improve the cognitive as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Armando, did you have a question for the last one?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, and I think this kind of falls into like user or loser, or maybe they're non-use.
Uh-huh.
But as far as when you work with the stroke victims and they're working how to stand up and so forth, how much work do you have to do just to, because I'm sure they're feeling depressed because of the fact that they're learning in such a basic move, right? Just like a basic movement. How much how much of that do you have? How much of time do you have to invest in getting them to get over that little depression, if I may ask?
Um, you would assume that, but from what I've seen, we've got to work with a few stroke victims that those basic functions that we take for granted being neurotypical, those are what they want to regain most after their injury. So being able to get up out of bed, being able to stand up, being able to walk to the bathroom are their main goals. So a lot of times they are very motivated to get those done.
Okay, so they're pretty
Right. Because
motivated.
like imagine if one day you woke up and all of a sudden you couldn't even sit up in bed. It may seem like a very menial task, but if you can't do that, then you can't start your day. So to them, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I don't know if I think you took maybe we'll talk about this afterwards, but did you watch that video of the man that lost his body?
I believe so. He's British.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we watched it in anatomical kinesiology.
He literally lost his ability to actually control his body. he couldn't move his feet without actually looking at him. So
Mhm.
he lost, like, he had some nerve damage.
Proprioception. He lost all of it.
He
Oh,
lost
that's
all of,
crazy.
so
Yeah.
he couldn't. So for example, like if you look at my, if you're watching the video, you see my fingers. I'm touching my thumb with all my fingers.
Yeah.
Simple stuff, right?
Yeah.
He couldn't do that.
Mhm.
Unless he looked at his hand.
He
Mhm.
had to look at it.
Oh, that's crazy.
He couldn't, to walk, he had to watch where he was putting his feet. 'Cause proprioception is where your body is in in relation to space.
Hmm.
And so when we're stepping, it's automatic. We don't have to think about where we're putting our foot. But he lost that sense. And so now he has to look at every step he takes. And if you turn the lights off, he can't walk.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I actually sent you that video not too long ago, Jojo. It was that video that was like about 40 minutes or something long.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Remember it now?
Yeah,
Where
yeah. Okay, now I
he was
remember.
having trouble getting out, like sitting up in bed at first. He couldn't even do that.
That's crazy, bro. Is there any way to train proprioception, or that's gone? If that's gone, that's gone.
A lot of it is it's hard to explain, but essentially it's moving a body part in space and having them try to detect it. So, for example, on the hemiparetic side, we might have them lean on their elbow and be like, all right, this is your elbow, this
Hmm.
is your shoulder, and just help them reorient their brain to, oh, okay, yeah, that is my shoulder. Yeah, that is my elbow.
Mm.
It's,
Get,
it,
getting them getting them neurologically aware of their body, right? Like you said,
Mhm.
being able to control your body in space a lot more.
Mhm.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of the times to test that after I'll just go back to stroke. Um, we'll take the patient's big toe and we'll wiggle it and we'll be like, all right, tell me if this is back or forward. And if they can't tell at the toe, we'll move up the body chain until we can find a place where they can tell.
Okay, and what's the purpose of that? Is that to like figure out what's part
To
of the body
see, see
specifically
how
you have to
far
work
the damage has gone, basically.
with?
So like if you have proprioception down to your big toe, then your proprioception is likely fine. But for example, if you don't have any proprioception, like from your hip to your toe, you're going to have a really hard time stepping and being able to figure out where your leg is in relation to space.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's really interesting stuff. I guess that'll lead us to our next part, which is learned helplessness. I wonder how many of these patients, or what percentage of them are just feel like there's no coming back from this.
actually, it's learn non-use.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So yeah, I learned about learned helplessness a lot in sports psychology, and they're pretty similar. Learned non-use, learned helplessness, but learned helplessness is essentially you didn't win a game, so you think you're never going to win a game.
Mm.
And so you become very self-pitying. And then learned non-use is a little similar, but it's more seen, for example, in stroke patients where they lose control over half the side of their body. So they're only using their non-affected side. And so a big part of especially early rehabilitation when the arm is completely unusable is just getting that patient to still recognize like, hey, you have another arm, how about we at least put it on the table while you're playing with your phone or whatever you're doing with your good arm. So it is really common for patients like that to just completely neglect that side of their body and have learned non-use. So a big part of our part as physical therapists is even if they can't use it, getting them to recognize that it's still there so that we can hopefully force recovery back into it.
And
Mm.
it's so, I'm so glad that we put this in here because Joe was his training some years ago. This is, I want to say 3 4 years ago. He was he was explaining to a couple of people in the class about how, because we had a client that was injured. What was it? An ankle injury, Joe?
Yeah, it was ankle.
It was an ankle injury, and they didn't want to do anything on their ankle, and they completely like wrapped it up to the point where it was immobile. So Joe starts talking about how that actually does more harm because you're learning, you're basically teaching yourself not to use that. You really want to have mobility in those injured areas. Yeah, it hurts, obviously, right? But when you have mobility there, what's going to happen? You're going to get more circulation. You're going to get more circulation. You're going to have more mobility. It's going to strengthen. It's going to get stronger. That's what you want. You want to be able to move. So when we are talking about that portion, I thought of Joe immediately because I remember him doing that in the class and he was explaining to that client, and it started to create a domino effect in the gym because before that it was like, oh, don't put any weight on that, don't hit it, don't touch it, and it wasn't updated. And that's when we started getting more into functional movement, and now what you see with functional patterns.
Yeah, totally. And
So
I also, oh, go on.
no, I was just going to say that that was a big dominant. It was it reminded me of Joe immediately because he was talking about how when you have a wrist injury, when you have an ankle injury, you have, especially with the ankle, because it's so um, the way it's built is a little complex, right? It's a ball joint. It's a ball joint. So you want to have that type of, you want to have the rotation because if your knee's not rotating or if your ankle's not rotating, your knee, which is not supposed to rotate, starts to rotate. So there you go.
Yeah, and it also leads into what we also screen for, which is fear avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like a huge thing in physical therapy is obviously physical therapy isn't the best feeling. A lot of people like to call it pain and torture instead of physical therapy.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of clients before.
They say that when I train them.
Yeah. So I can understand where the fear comes from. So that's definitely something that we have to acknowledge and work around. And so a lot of times when patients or clients sustain an injury, they'll self-restrict their behavior out of fear of making it worse, when in reality, immobilizing it and losing your range of motion, losing your strength is actually going to make it a lot worse.
Yep.
And then also sometimes you'll see, for example, a patient with a back injury or an ACL injury, uh, they'll go to the doctor and somebody will say, you know, I don't want you to squat or I don't want you to bend your back. So then they leave thinking, I can never squat again. I can never bend my back again. And that's not realistic and that's not helpful. And so a lot of the times we have to we have to reframe their thinking. And it's like, well, I just don't want you to fully bend your knee right now. But how about we go to this pain-free range? And then next time you come, we'll try to go to a bigger range. And so a lot of it is just reframing the way they think to try to get rid of that fear avoidance.
Yeah, it's you're really trying to prevent that from atrophy because they could atrophy during that time. They could really, you can lose muscle or
Losing range of motion, that's a huge deal because then you have to compensate from other areas. So if you lose dorsiflexion in your ankle, your running's going to be messed up, your stair climbing's going to be messed up, everything.
you just said range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel Joe smiling in his soul.
I mean, Armando's right when he says that, because over the years, as I've educated myself more, I've learned more. I've tried to tell my clients this because initially it was okay if their shoulder hurts or they have something wrong with their rotator cuff, their knee, hip, whatever, right? And they told me they didn't want to do something because it hurt. I was initially taught like, okay, we're not doing that, right?
Yeah.
As I said, as I started learning a little bit more, well, a little bit of pain as you're trying to make your rehab, your recovery, you're going to have to go through that acute pain so that that pain does not stay or become chronic, right? As long as you're not putting a heavy load on it or anything like that. and we're doing our prep work, you know, our tissue work before, and we're incorporating all the things that we need to just start moving that part of the body so that it doesn't calcify, it doesn't harden, it doesn't cast over, because when that happens, that's going to lead to more problems. And I've dealt with clients that, you know, throughout the body with every single joint you could possibly think of, didn't want to move, and I'm trying to get them to move a little bit, trying to get them to understand. But that fear, is a huge thing. And then it leads us to our next thing, catastrophic thinking. I can't move my arm whatsoever because as soon as I lift my arm over my head, oh, my shoulder and my neck starts killing me. Try to explain there's reasons for that. We have to prep that part of the body, but we do want to move it. So how would you go about getting somebody to not think, you know, very negatively, catastrophically?
Me personally, a lot of it is showing them and explaining to them that pain doesn't always mean something's wrong. A lot of the times, for example, let's say shoulder impingement, um, we need to work past that available range so that we can get your range of motion back and work on getting rid of the impingement. So that pain, while it may be uncomfortable, it's also an important part of therapy. So explaining to them, you know, it's not always going to be comfortable, but that in itself is a good thing because that means we're pushing past the limits that we need to.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of it, if a patient comes back and they're like, oh my gosh, after you stretched me, I wasn't able to move for 2 days, I'll probably take it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I would personally try to frame the way I'm saying things so that they see the importance of it and so that they understand that pain doesn't mean they're going to die or that their arm's going to fall off.
Yeah, yeah. It's what one thing. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, right? But one thing that I have been teaching my clients within the last couple years is pain through rehab, as we're getting it better, is going to happen, right? Because we're trying to rehab and repair the injury and get your body functioning the way it's supposed to. So that way, when you go through your daily activities and you're able to start doing more things in your life that you were limited to doing, you don't have that pain in your everyday life. It's
Yeah,
just
totally.
about trying to get past this. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I mean, especially for you guys, I mean, you could probably frame it in the way of after you exercise, you're sore. But that doesn't mean it was bad. That means it was good. That means you're building muscle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's something that I want to bring up because I think that both of you guys will agree with this. You mentioned earlier that if we don't address an injury, you can change the way you move and your body will overcompensate. One of the things that I always ask about when I do a consultation is I ask them, what is your injury history? I don't care how long ago it was. I don't care how long it is. What is your injury history? Because the normal response is, well, I had this injury years ago, but it doesn't hurt me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it still changes the way you move.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is,
Especially if it was never addressed.
there you go. Thank you. And then when it comes down to it, like it changes the way you move and you don't realize it. And then also it kills off the nerves, so your brain is not really communicating with those said injuries or said body parts or those nerves in those areas. So whenever you do get adjusted, like if you go to a chiropractor, you get adjusted, or you go to the physical therapist, you get stretched, you get massage, you get worked on. Of course, you're going to feel some soreness and some pain because your brain is finally communicating with those nerves and those areas that had experienced trauma because it was injured.
I'm really glad you said that, Armando, because just like you said, those injuries happen. That part of the body starts to harden, right? Cast over. And then, like Nicci was saying, you then start to compensate your movement in other areas. But as soon as you get that part of the body moving again, you're going to be like, oh man, it hurts again. This hasn't hurt me in years. That's because it's been stuck. Now that you're moving the way you're supposed to, and we're trying to implement it with the rest of your body, so your functionality increases, now there's pain because you haven't used it. Just like you said, Armando, your nervous system's starting to communicate with that part of your body again. This is what you need to address that you haven't addressed. Just because it wasn't hurting doesn't mean you're okay. You're going to start having other problems throughout your kinetic chain, throughout your body down the road. This is what we're trying to limit, to decrease, to get rid of.
And then so if you guys want me to draw for you, here's a picture that I can draw. Think of low back pain, right? You drive a lot, sit down. Then what's the common complaint that we get when people come to physical therapy, people come to trainers? My lower back hurts. My lower back hurts. What's the biggest the biggest thing that I've learned is that a lot of people don't activate the glutes. People think the glutes are just something that you sit on or something that you look at. That's not you don't. Not saying that you don't, but
if they twerking, no.
Same with the transverse abdominis as well.
yeah,
A lot of the times for low back patients, the first, can you guys hear my dog? I'm sorry.
It's okay.
hi, bro.
A lot of the first exercise we'll prescribe to low back patients is just posterior tilt with your pelvis, getting your transverse abdominis engaged, because a lot of times people just let that go, and that's a big problem, and it can cause lots of back pain.
And it's crazy because if you don't activate the glutes, you want to be able to move out of your hips. So, for example, when you're bending over, right? People think that if you watch the majority of the people do it, people need to activate the glutes, y'all. If you don't activate the glutes, you're not going to be able to bend over from the hips. And people, when you watch them bend over, especially, now don't take that the wrong way when I say when you watch people bend over. You have to
thinking about it like that until you said that.
Well, you know.
Keep going.
Welcome to the adapt session. But I think it's just one of those things where people don't realize that when you're bending over, you're actually using the glutes to bend over. It's actually, you're using the hips to do it. But if you watch the majority of the people, they're bending over with their lower back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like it's just your point is on point. Nicci's point is on point. They go right together. You can't activate the glutes properly if your lumbar pelvic hip complex is not where it needs to be, if it's not lined up. So it has to be lined up correctly in order for all that to be working, for your TVA, glutes, all that to be working.
And this is kind of obvious, right? But newsflash, man, the glutes are actually a group of muscles, not just one. Gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, gluteus minimus. So there's 3 different levels of it, and you guys got to activate all 3 of them. If you're not using any of them, then that's a major reason why your back is hurting.
It's usually a major reason why a lot of areas are hurting, because, as you said, it's a large group of muscles, not just one, and everything's connected. So when something's off, something else in that area or somewhere else across the body is off. You're misaligned. Tissues have too much compression or not the right amount of tension. Things are pulling and pushing each other. Your body's not working in unison as that one system as it should be. Your body's fighting each other during movements. That's what we're trying to get rid of.
Your glute med is super important. People always want to talk about the glute max, but your glute medius is really important for abduction and external rotation, and especially in women with our higher Q angles, which is the angle of our femur to our pelvis. Having a strong glute med is really important for being able to control dynamic knee flexion and a whole bunch of, especially in sports, it's really important to have a strong glute med. So often that's, again, one of our first go-to exercises is just having a patient do clamshells and work up their glute med strength.
Yep. Glad you mentioned that, because I know I have some clients that are listening to this and they're cursing at me because I always make them do band work and I have them do clamshells. I have them do a whole bunch of hip opening exercises.
Yeah.
And they're talking about how much their booty meat hurts. So it's like, hey, at least you got the use of it. I'm showing you how to use it. And then they get mad at me and they're cursing at me and they're like, they're telling me, go fuck off, Armando, fuck you. I'm like, I love you too. And
And
then
it's probably because it hasn't been used very often, you
and
know?
then
So now it's getting its butt kicked.
and then the next day they're able to do kettlebells flawlessly. And then they're like, oh my gosh, thank you.
Right.
I'm showing you how to use your body.
Yeah. It's funny how all interdependent our body is.
Yes,
Very much so. Very
very
much
much
so.
so.
I guess this takes us into our next thing then, right? I mean, we've been talking about a wide range of patients or clients from stroke victims to people just trying to get in shape. And then you mentioned athletes, right? So obviously intensity would play a different, it would play a different role in each of those type of clients training. How would you go about doing that with, let's say, stroke victim, some person who just had like a a slip and a fall type of injury, and then an athlete trying to get them back on the field?
Me personally, for the stroke victim, I want them to get it right more times than they don't. So that way they can just create that motor program in their head for that task or skill, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Um, Somebody that's more of just like a quote unquote regular citizen, I think I would probably make it about even. Like they got it right 5 times, they got it wrong, if we're going in that term, wrong 5 times. And so they don't get discouraged at how much they're getting it wrong, but they also have that feedback that they need. And then for a high elite athlete, not only would I obviously up the reps and the time and everything else that goes with it, but I would try to make it more intense, but not so intense that they're getting it wrong every time, you know, because you still want them to be able to build up that confidence and get the skills down that they need. But I would definitely make it the most intense for them.
Gotcha. It what With that being said, would it be fair to say that intensity doesn't really matter as far as what the person's coming back from or what they're trying to accomplish, but it matters more so for the individual?
Yeah. So I wouldn't classify it based off like an injury or pathology, but
Okay.
more so off the individual. So especially if you have somebody that is already really discouraged, or if you have somebody that's really motivated, you can base it off of that. So somebody that's really motivated, having a more intense training isn't going to affect them negatively as it might be somebody who's already discouraged.
That makes a lot of sense because I'm no athlete. I'm just regular guy, likes to work out myself. Just happen to be a trainer, but I feel
Right.
for myself when something's more challenging and more intense, and I'm not getting it right. Sure, I get a little frustrated, but that inspires me to go a little harder. Like I need to push
Right.
harder. We got to get this right. So it just depends on the person. I know Armando's like that too. So
Joe's an athlete.
I appreciate it.
Quit lying your ass off.
So I guess let's go into this intensity, right? We just talked about intensity. Let's go into the 10,000 hour theory.
Oh,
What
this is
Right.
perfect.
what do you think about that? And I know Armando has a little something to say. So whoever wants to go first, let's get into it.
Sure. I mean, personally, I don't have an issue with the 10,000 hour theory. I've heard there's some controversy on it, and especially in literature, there's been some conflicting evidence on how accurate it is. But I mean, at the basics of it, it's really just the principles of neuroplasticity. So repetition, specificity, time, intensity, use it and improve it. So it's not like you can go wrong training under these principles, but I think the controversy maybe comes from, can anybody ever really be an expert? Because the whole concept behind the theory is to be an expert in something, you need at least 10,000 hours of training in it. But I mean, what is an expert? How can you say somebody's an expert?
Right. So I guess let me add this to that. Um, so would it be the difference between being efficient at a skill and then becoming proficient, because there's a difference, right?
Mhm.
What would you say that's how they would classify if you're an expert or not?
I think that'd be a good way. I mean, I've never um, looked it up specifically in regards to this, but I think that's like a good way of framing it. You can be efficient at something, but that doesn't necessarily correlate with being an expert. So I'd say I like your definition. I think that sounds good.
The only reason I bring this up, right, is because, um, okay, let's say this. So I am learning how to box,
Hmm.
right? From where I started to where I am now, I would say I'm efficient,
Hmm.
but I'm not proficient. I would say that's elite level,
Right,
right? Where those guys just do it naturally. They know
right.
how to move, they know how to throw their punches. I'm becoming efficient where I'm learning how to do that, and I'm becoming a lot more comfortable with
Hmm.
the foot movement, the punches, coordination, but I'm not at that level. That, at least that's how I like to think of it.
Hmm.
There's a difference between learning a skill and becoming pretty good at it, and then there's like elite level proficiency. So
Right, right.
that's the only reason why I brought that up.
No, yeah, I agree with that. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Makes sense to me too, man. I think Nicci put it perfectly, right? Like 10,000 hours. I don't know about the doing the 10,000 hours just to become an expert thing. I'm like,
Because also, what if, for example, the training you're doing in that 10,000 hours isn't the right training,
Hmm.
you
That's a
know?
good point.
it
Yeah.
becomes
That's a
or
good
it
point.
becomes obsolete. Like, and we have experience with that, Joe. I mean,
Diminished returns.
yeah.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
at the training that we did. Okay, look at the training that we did when we were first starting out with the gym.
Hmm.
Do we train that way now?
Not so much. No.
No,
Very rare.
it doesn't work, and it doesn't work for us. We're able to we become. I feel like we become experts because now I'm able to, like, with all the respect to some of these other people who like to do, oh, it's leg day or it's chest day, it's arm day, even though that's every day. But when people do like the when they split up the brackets, they're usually doing a lot of isolation movements, right?
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier.
And I've talked about it in previous episodes. I did a conditioning class at SS State, and the workout got me sweating. I did sweat. I did burn calories, but I hated the fact that I couldn't move the next day, and I wasn't satisfied. So I've gotten to the point where now I know what's going to satisfy me in terms of a workout.
Mm.
I like the full body. I like I like the functional movement. I like the functional patterns. But I know why I like it. I know why I know why it works for me. Whereas if I just do a generic workout, I know it's not going to satisfy me.
Yeah, I guess going off of what Nikki said and going off of what you said, right? You're talking about doing something that, because you know a little bit more now, it's not, let's say, the best for your body and overall functionality. And then, like Nikki said, well, you can be training a certain way, but it might not be the correct way, right? That's
Exactly.
what, for example, we get a lot of people that do like long distance running, right? Like marathon. Nothing wrong with running. I like running, right? Running is something that we naturally do as human beings. It's part of our biology. That's how our mechanics were actually made to run and throw. But there are people whose gait cycles are slightly dysfunctional, and that's why, let's say, after they run, handful of miles, their knees hurting, their hips hurting, something is going on with your gait cycle. Your movement is not proper. It's not correct. And that's where that training comes in. Even though you're training your butt off, you're training really hard to get ready for this marathon, you're not moving well. So we
Mhm.
need to we need to address those things so you can move correctly.
Mhm.
I'm so happy that you brought up the gait cycle because that's something that a lot of people overlook.
That's my favorite.
There we go.
Yeah, so I think so the gait cycle is something that's very overlooked, so underappreciated because I think you can learn, like, everybody has everybody has their imbalances, right? Muscular imbalances. Everybody has their
Yep.
stuff. But you want to have a decent, you want to be able to move contralaterally. You want to be able to walk, walk and run smoothly because everything is dependent on how you move, how you throw.
Those are our primary functions. Everything else is secondary, tertiary. I mean, that you can deadlift, you can bench press, you can do all that stuff. That stuff's great. There's nothing wrong with it. However, if you neglect our primary functions as human beings, what we evolved to do, stand, walk, run, throw, then you're going to start to impede those mechanics. You're going to start to have some problems.
And it's another thing, and it's like Nicci mentioned earlier, right? When we get sore, it's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you want to be productive sore. You don't want to. It's like I told you, like when I do the isolation movements, I'm not feeling satisfied because it's impeding my movement. It's not helping my movement. So when I do functional patterns, I get my ass kicked and I get sore. It hurts, but I can do this.
Not like after chest day, right? Where your chest is so sore you can't lift your arm above your head or something. Yeah.
Yeah, or freaking like trying to do like a freaking hamstring curl and you can't even sit down.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, there's a lot of things that as a fitness industry that we need to correct, but that's neither here nor there. But I'm glad y'all brought it up. Nicci,
Actually,
let's go ahead.
actually, if we do another gym myths episode, Nick,
Uh-huh.
I want to formally invite you as with your expertise in the gait because I want to formally invite you to make fun of these movements with us
All right.
because that's where Joe had the classic line, "Who the fuck comes up with this shit?"
That's so funny. That sounds awesome.
He actually it actually got us off guard. We had to stop recording because he's like, "No, I'm serious. Who came up with this shit?" But it really comes down to proficiency versus efficiency, right? Like personally, if we were to use a movement, I would say kettlebells, right?
I like kettlebells.
We've been doing it now for about a decade. When we started, we couldn't do shit,
Very, very tough to do. I couldn't swing that thing for the life of me.
and it hurt. Literally, we bruised ourselves. We got shin burgers. We got bruises all over the place. And now we do it with ease to the point where if we got away from it for a while, if I literally stopped and Joe stopped for about a month, 2 months, 3 months, okay, our muscle memory will remember it and we'll be able to pick it up like that.
Can
Yeah.
I say one thing?
Yeah.
Muscle memory is not technically a thing. You guys have the programs in your brain for that motor task.
Thank you. You don't know how many
Thank
times I'm trying to
you.
tell clients this and people this. Like muscle memory is not a real thing.
But I mean, like for
Oh,
patient terms or layman terms, muscle memory is,
It's
that's
it's,
just the term everybody knows.
it's fine, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's the
I've been,
reason why.
I'm so glad you said that. You don't know how many like I'm,
Same
tell,
here.
I'm telling my boys,
I was,
my clients, like muscle memory. That's not true. Your muscles don't remember
I'm so
anything.
happy. I'm so happy that you picked up on that. I'm like, oh, let's see if she. I'm like, please pick up on it. Please pick up on it. Yeah, I'm so happy
Yeah.
that you did. I was like, that's the homie right there. That's the reason why
But
I wanted
see,
the show.
you implemented the principles of neuroplasticity. You created the synaptic pathways to create the motor program in your brain for that motor task.
Look, everybody listening, watching, muscle memory is not real. Don't say that to me no more. I don't
Your
want to hear it.
muscles don't have a brain.
Yes, they do not. Jeez. You have no idea how many times I'm like going back and forth with my friends or something about this. Like, no, it doesn't exist.
Trust me, I wish I had that many extra brains.
A lot of,
That's nice, huh?
unfortunately, I know a lot of people don't even have one, but that's.
All right.
I'm so happy that Nicci picked up on that. But you mentioned something yourself, Joe, earlier today. You're talking about proficiency versus efficient.
Yes, sir.
Just because someone's efficient or just because someone's proficient, how does that correlate to teaching? Like, can you guys want to talk about a little bit about how just because, let's use an athlete for example, right? Like just because Lester Posey's a really good hitter doesn't mean that he's gonna be able to teach me or you or Nikki
Mhm.
how to be that guy, that good of a hitter, right?
Right. Totally. I think a lot of it, especially when you're talking in terms of like coaching,
Yeah.
a lot of it comes down to like, uh, are they able to implement the theories of motor learning, like part versus whole practice, closed versus open environment, yada yada yada. And
Genteel
then on top of it, um, like the sports psychology aspect of it as well, being able to be a coach takes a lot more than just knowing the skill,
Mm.
in my opinion.
I think so too. I agree.
I would completely agree with you. Yeah, I think so. Let's go with I'm gonna use myself as an example. Okay, let's say Armando just talked about kettlebells. I feel pretty um, competent and confident in using that piece of equipment, doing a lot of different things with it. Um, I do feel that it might come a little bit easier to me than with other people,
Hmm.
right? From what I've seen, people coming into the gym, learning how to use that. So, um, learning how to, for myself, learning how to scale the movements that I may do down to a more simpler version, and then being able to teach the clients that first, being able to modify those movements, right? Depending on where that specific clients are at that particular time.
Hmm.
Um, and like you said, making sure that they can adapt to the movement, motor learning, right? Motor control, motor development, and then we can start picking it up from there as they start to feel more comfortable.
Hmm.
So
Totally.
I think it has a lot to do with understanding that you may be good at it, but the people that you may be coaching may not even start off at the level where you started at,
Hmm.
let's say, right? And I'm not going to say up or down. It's not that. It's just, depending on if people, for example, I have an athletic background, so some of the stuff comes a little bit easier to me, right?
Hmm.
Because I played sports. Other people who may have not played sports and they're trying to get into training to be healthy, take care of themselves. Let's say they were just in academia, right, studying all the time. Now they're like, it's time for me to exercise as an adult. They may not have that background that I have,
Hmm.
and the let's say the skill set that I have built up before. So you have to completely start them off at a different level, base level, and allow them to make some mistakes,
Hmm.
get some things right so they feel good and they learn from those mistakes and they continue to move forward. Everything basically that Nicci was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Just so everybody's listening, everybody has different skill sets. All right. So Joe has a very powerful core. So he's going to be able to do not just a regular pull up, but he'll be able to put a belt and attach 45-pound plates to it or kettlebells to it and do a pull up. But at one point, I think Joe can attest to this. I was better at doing box jumps at one point than he was.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Totally.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know
And
some.
that's another part about being able to teach it, is being able to understand that not everybody's gonna look the same, even though you teach them the same, and that you it's not just like one size fits all. Just because you taught or
Exactly.
coached somebody one way and it worked for them doesn't mean it's gonna work for the other person. Because like you said, some things just come more naturally. Like I know for me personally, in terms of PT school, a lot of my friends struggle with the gait cycle, but to me, it just comes naturally to me. I just look at it and understand it. So that's like, I think another big part of it is realizing that not everybody's gonna come into it with the same mindset or see it from the same perspective. So just because you're really good at it doesn't mean that the way that worked for you is gonna work for them.
And,
I think that makes a really good coach, be somebody being able to understand that.
Hmm.
and that's something that we've said before on this podcast is it's not a one size fits all when it comes to training. You really had to adjust to the client that you have because one client might be naturally gifted, the other person might be injured, the other person
Hmm.
might not
Yeah.
be athletically gifted, or they might be a little clumsier. So
Hmm.
you got to teach them how to use their body.
Yeah.
And your body's you got one body, you gotta take care of it. And now with all that being said, now we can switch topics. And Nikki, one of the reasons why you and I get along is because we have issues with my
Mhm. We have issues, just period.
Who doesn't?
oh, migraines are a pain in the ass, and
Totally.
we we bonded over the fact that we would have these horrible things at times.
Hmm.
But one of the things that actually helps people who suffer from migraines is actually cannabis intake.
Definitely.
So I would love to
Mm.
ask you guys, how do you feel about CBD and cannabis intake yourself, and how it's helped you?
Uh, well, not only migraine. I mean, I remember early in my college career, uh, I was taking a speech class and we had to do a speech. And so I've always been very interested in the topic of medical marijuana and the effects of CBD. So I did a speech on that. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard the story of Charlotte's Web, not the pig and the spider,
Oh,
but no, not that one, a different one. So this story of Charlotte's Web is about a little girl who was born with severe epilepsy, and she would have upwards of 300 seizures a week. And yeah, and her parents had tried a whole bunch of therapies for her, blah blah blah. Comes down to they try CBD, and she went from having 300 seizures a week to 2 to 3 a month with the help of CBD.
oh,
And so she essentially became the spokesperson for medical CBD and the access to it. And so I that's always been a very influential story in my life. And so I think personally that CBD has a lot of beneficial effects. I know that it's very helpful for migraines, and then also on top of that, increasing appetite for people like stroke victims,
Mm.
or I'm sorry, cancer victims.
especially glaucoma victims too.
Oh,
Hmm.
really?
Issues. Um,
Yeah. Or like my friend, she has a lot of like gastrointestinal issues. And it's like the one thing that can help her actually like calm down and eat, because most mornings she wakes up very nauseous and ends up throwing up. And so she was prescribed like Zofran, which is like an anti-nausea medicine, and a whole bunch of other medications that one she didn't like, they didn't make her feel good, they didn't help. And once she started taking the CBD, she actually got some relief.
Hmm.
that's actually really, some of those drugs are really heavy.
Yeah, totally.
They
And
get,
that's go.
I was gonna say it's actually really cannabis is more natural, so your body reacts to it differently than it would these foreign drugs that are supposed that really like take a toll on your body.
Right, yeah. And I mean, I know people still have very different opinions based on it, and even the research behind it isn't very conclusive, but the research behind it is, it's hard to do research on it. I mean, it's still classified as a Schedule 1 drug, which means that it technically can't be research for medical purposes at this point. So um, it's it's got a journey to come, but I think it's come a long way so far.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think there's still a stigma with it.
Yeah. I mean, I follow, obviously, I don't know if I've said this, but I want to specialize in children with developmental delays. And so I follow a bunch of families, either Facebook or Instagram or wherever it be, that have children with developmental delays. And almost all of them are fighting for their kids' right to have CBD as medicine for a number of conditions. And so um, it's nice to see that it's getting traction, but it's also sad to see, because we live in California, we're really blessed. We've
Yeah.
had medical marijuana since the 90s. There's still places that you will be in prison for having a gram of medical marijuana on you, you know?
Yeah,
Or a family I follow in Missouri has been fighting for their son's access to CBD for years, and he's just now finally being able to get it when he's 13.
And
Wow.
it's really, I'm actually really happy with the NBA because they finally abolished the suspension for marijuana.
Really? I didn't know that.
So if you guys let us know in the future if you guys want us to do some more episode in terms of medical marijuana and cannabis, we'll bring Nicci back because she knows everything really.
Mhm.
Um, we'll bring her back and we'll have a good discussion regarding CBD and
Yeah, definitely.
marijuana. And now,
The fun part.
if you guys are looking at us, we're both wearing the same SF State shirt, and we probably both had the same kinesiology coffee mug.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Salud. For everybody who's not watching and can't see and doesn't live in the area, SF State is San Francisco State University,
Yeah,
which
you
means
ready?
Armando and Nikki went to college, got their kinesiology degrees, and I believe your mascot is Gators, correct?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, so San Francisco State University in San Francisco, Bay Area. For those of you who aren't in the area, now you guys know what's going on.
Or even in the country. But you know what? That's where we're from. That's our alma mater.
Hmm.
And that's where I met Nicci. At the time, we were both a little sleepier at the time, but
It was sleepy times, but it was good times.
yes.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed my time at SF State. I mean, now looking back on the courses and classes I got to take as a kinesiology major, I definitely feel pretty well prepared for my doctorate program. So that's really cool. I mean, essentially, my whole first year of my doctorate program were just repeats of classes I had taken from San Francisco State.
I think we had the most underrated kinesiology program.
Right.
I
Yeah,
think
it's
I think we were a step ahead of the curve on
totally. And I mean, I think part of that is we also get to partner with UCSF, which is, I mean, obviously one of the top medical schools in the country
that.
or the world.
So that helps a lot. And I think so we look back on it finally when we were going through it. We weren't very fond of it.
No.
So there was I think the funny thing with Nicci is actually I met her. I think I met you before, but you and I were too sleepy to acknowledge each other. And then that final semester, I met you on your final semester. I was supposed to graduate with you guys.
I know, but biomechanics messed you up, right? You couldn't get in or something?
Yeah, messed me up. They wouldn't let me in because I didn't do physics, and they made physics a requirement. But speaking of biomechanics, so Joe, if you guys listen to the show, Joe loves biomechanics. And one of the things that he always asked me about when I went to school is how was the biomechanics class?
And we had very different experiences with our biomechanics class. Let's just say that because my professor only ever taught this one class and then disappeared. And
Yes.
so then Armando got a new professor.
And you always and so on the run sheet, I actually put a crying laughing emoji next to biomechanics for a reason, because I think so. Johnny Yell and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but now that I have Nicci here, she can also tell you the same thing. You always heard horror stories about biomechanics because it's an intriguing class, it's a difficult class, but it's very hard to teach. So the department is still the department has always struggled in terms of hiring a biomechanics teacher,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where if you talk to the department chair, they'd actually laugh every time we mention the name biomechanics, because
I mean, imagine just teaching a physics class to a bunch of kids that are there because they like sports.
yes,
That's essentially what it was like.
that's really what it was. So a lot of times I tell Joe, and he thinks I'm kidding.
So, you guys think it was kind of like a waste of time?
I don't think it was a waste of time. I just don't think the professors were properly prepared.
I see.
That's what I think too. Yeah, it's for us that when I always tell Joe this. I learned more about biomechanics from him than I actually did from some of the teachers over there because
That's crazy.
there was always a controversy going on. The teacher that I had, she knew biomechanics. The problem was when it came to teaching it, she thought that we already knew it,
Hmm.
and it's like we don't know shit about it.
Hmm.
And the so at
And a lot of it, for me personally, I took trigonometry, not calculus. And so a lot of biomechanics applies calculus ideas. And
yes,
so if you haven't taken calculus, you can be lost.
yeah, or even trigonometry, and it was not. It was very open ended when it came to the questions, and they taught it as if it's closed end question. So if you guys are asking me, if you guys are asking yourselves, what does that mean, open ended versus closed end? So let's say truth or false, or there's an exact answer. That's not how biomechanics is. Biomechanics has so one of the questions I'll give you, for example, is the laws of biomechanics follow trigonometry, algebra, and calculus, right? She asked us which law does it follow? Calculus, trigonometry, or algebra? A lot of people chose algebra. Truth is, none of the answers were wrong, but she decided to go with trigonometry.
Right.
Hmm.
A lot of people failed that exam because of questions like that. So we don't have any issues with biomechanics. It was just when it comes to the class itself, it was always it
Mess.
was it was always messy. And
Once
for
I got to Sac State, which is where I'm doing my doctorate program, we didn't have a specific biomechanics class, but we had pathokinesiology,
yeah,
which essentially we just called biomechanics because that's really what it was. But that one was really cool because we got to see it in terms of just learning the theories of biomechanics, which is what my undergrad experience was. We actually got to like see it in terms of like a pitcher throwing a pitch or somebody doing a squat and the running cycle and so on. So I feel like I got a better experience with it and got to see how it's actually applied in the real world once I left the SF state class. But I still think the SF state class was a nice introductory.
it was, and that's how I felt about mine too, because I felt like she was doing her best to get us to understand the material, but she was also from Brazil, so she had that culture shock, and she did
Yeah,
her best
ours.
to relate to us. She did her best to relate to us, and bless her heart. But it was just, and afterwards, after our class, she was better. But that first semester was so rough; it interfered with my chemistry class.
Yeah.
And
And I don't know how uh, other people's experience was, but with mine, our classes were huge. Like we had upwards of 80 to 100 people per class. One
Wow.
time I took a class that had almost 600 people in it, no joke. So the professor we had, he had came from a private university in Canada where his class size was like 12 to 15 students. And he was just so overwhelmed, he couldn't even figure out how to teach a class of our size. So I think that really affected it as well.
yeah, that was yeah. I remember hearing about that. I heard a lot of stories about your guys.
Not bad for him. I mean, he tried.
He tried, and bless their hearts, man. It's like it's
Yeah,
it's a hard topic. It's a hard
yeah,
topic, and
totally.
the thing that was crazy for me though was when you told me that you took it with exercise phys and you took it with what was the other one, qualitative analysis.
Um, I think I took it my last semester. So at that point, I was taking 19 units. I think I was taking Gen Chem 1, biomechanics, exercise phys, and then just some other random classes that I can't remember. But those were definitely the big top ones that come to mind.
So keep in mind, you guys. All right. So when I say that Nicci is smart as hell, I'm not kidding. She took exercise phys and biomechanics, which is naturally difficult, but they always say do not the advisor, my advisor was Anna Maria. She would say never take exercise phys, and
This is the head of the kinesiology department.
yeah, she would say no, do not take it, do not take them together.
But I had no choice. I mean, I needed to graduate. And
And
so
what happened? She aced both of them. I'm like, how the hell did you ace both of these classes and the
I
drama?
had a lot of intrinsic motivation to make it to grad school.
There you go.
But
No, but at that point, I was taking classes at San Francisco State, Los Medanos College in Pittsburgh. So I would leave San Francisco State after neuromotor control, take Bart back home, take the 2.5 hour journey, whatever it was, then go to chemistry at Los Medanos in Pittsburgh. That was from 5:30 to 10 p.m.
dang.
Yeah, after you just said that, I want to take a nap now.
It was rough, but
And,
it's
I remember you telling me back then. I was like, how the hell did you still get A's and everything?
it was rough. But I mean, uh, for me personally, I've always had a very intrinsic motivation for school. I mean, nobody in my family has ever graduated high school, let alone go to college. And so I really wanted to be the one to break that cycle. So I think I just naturally had the internal motivation. And then on top of it, you can't get into PT school with anything less than a 3.6 GPA. So that
Yeah.
was also the motivation.
Yeah, you went a little higher than that. But here's the funny part though. So I took X Phys a year or so after you left.
Yeah, it must have been like the semester or something after.
Yeah, it was during the summer. It was my last semester there. And the thing about exercise phys is that they always leave the exams outside, so everybody has access to the exams. But the one thing that
Well, after we take them, just so people know.
after, after you take them, obviously, yeah. So they more, I don't know if I want to say they recycle them. They change the wording a lot of times, and people go like, "Man, you guys just cheated." No, you gotta learn how people. You gotta learn how the professors ask the questions too. This is it's not just learning the answers, etc. You gotta learn how they ask you the questions. Sometimes they're
Also, my exercise physiology teacher would make us do short answer. So we couldn't just do multiple choice.
exactly. So we had the same professor, Dr. Lee.
Mhm.
Yep, same professor. So I had to do mine online, but the lab was in person. Our lab instructor um, seemed to take pride in the fact that nobody got 100 on those exams. And on the first class, he's talking about how nobody gets exams. If you guys want to see what the exam is about, the exam is right there. But he starts getting salty, and he starts saying, "Somebody, nobody gets 100 except for someone who did it 2 years ago," and it still pisses me the fuck off. So, so he starts talking about it, and I'm like, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, and I was like, wait, Nicci was in that class. So I sent Nicci a text immediately or a DM. I'm like, Nicci, were you in this class 2 years ago? Yes. Were you the one that got 100 on the exam? Yes. This guy is still salty about it.
That's so funny. That's great. I mean, uh, it was definitely a shock. I wasn't like expecting that to happen. I was also probably the sickest I've been in like recent years. No joke. On my way, I literally only showed up for the test. I was supposed to have other classes and whatnot. Only showed up for the test. The whole way there on BART, I was nauseated, trying to not essentially pass out.
Yeah.
Got to class, took the 2 tests, and then went back home. But yeah, it was a surprise.
He was salty about that, Nicci. He literally was like, no, none of you are gonna get 100 on this. I can't believe she got it. And then when he said she, I was like, definitely Nicci. I was like, definitely Nicci. He like dropped. I was like, and he looked at me. He's like, what? I was like, I know who got the A. He's like, no, you don't. I was like, I know who got the A. I know
Thank
who it
you.
was. I know who got the 100. I know who got it. And it's funny that you mentioned being sick and going to an exam because that's how I was for another professor that we had. Let's call him mayonnaise or the condiment.
Yeah.
And now I'm grateful because you guys see we're on a podcast and I edit these videos and I edit the audio and I learned how to film correctly through him. So like I gave him thanks when I finished the class, but we had a rough history, and he had a history of being a little cocky. Do you have any good stories about him?
I don't have good stories about him, but I have stories about him.
Let's clarify that.
I don't know. I had him my very first semester at San Francisco State. From the very beginning, the first thing he said was, raise your hand if you want to be a physical therapist. You know, probably 9 out of the 30 of us raised our hand. He goes, by the end of this semester, none of you will be raising your hand. He had made it his mission to make sure none of us wanted to be physical therapists anymore. So I
Do you
don't
know why?
know what.
Do you know why?
I don't. Well, the way he would word it is it's just not worth it. You're going to be $250,000 in debt and you're never going to get accepted anyways and you're never going to get a job and blah blah blah. So
Huh.
to me that just made me feel like he tried to get into PT school and never got accepted and now
Hmm.
he's bitter.
Yeah, he's pretty bitter.
But yeah, essentially he just made it his goal to like discourage people. And so from the beginning, me and him did not get along. Every time he had a negative point against being a physical therapist, I would bring up a positive point to fight that, and he didn't enjoy that. At one point, we had to make a mock resume, and so I made my mock resume and I get my grade back, and he'd given me a D. And I was like, what? And so I went to go talk to him and ask him where it was coming from, how I could improve. And he was like, well, the stuff on your actual resume is fine, but I asked for single spacing and this is 1.5 spacing. And I was like, that's it? And he was like, well, you really need to be able to follow format when you join the professional world. And so me and him went back and forth a little bit over it. And I was like, so the content of my work is okay. It's just this half spacing that is the issue. And he was like, I don't even know why you're arguing this with me. It's only one grade.
Oh, I hated when he said that. That's
And just from there, we just didn't get along.
yeah. He was. I'm grateful for the experience that we in the end later on, but so one of my other friends, she didn't get along with him either. So my last semester, I had him for senior research, and I was able to pull an A out of him. And I felt I was carrying you, and I was carrying my other friend with me when I did it because it was just like the ultimate like
Right.
it was like the ultimate fu at the end
Right.
because when I took motor development, I had a flu myself. Joe remembers this. I was actually really. I went to work the day before, and Joe saw me. I was dying.
You were exhausted, like sleep deprived, and like super, super sick.
He's like, yeah. Joe is just like, yeah, Joe is like. I was like, he's like, man, you look horrible. He's like, you should put your. He's like, you should lower. He goes like, you should lower your because your eyes look like crap. So the next day I go in and the exam, I'm just ready to take it. I'm just ready for it to be over. And he's taking forever talking. He's bragging about something that he did. I don't know what it was. And then he finishes up with, aren't I a great teacher? He's saying that right in front of me. And I'm like, no, you suck. Give us the damn exam. And I had a 79.8% in his class. I think it was like a 555 out of 623, something like that. Usually when that happens, that point, if it's like point 0.6 and above, you round it up, right? He refused to round it up. I was like, why
Yeah.
didn't you round it up? I knew partially because he was butthurt because I said he sucked, but the other one was but he was also just like he said the same thing to me. He's like, not everyone's gonna get the grade they want.
Yeah.
The worst part is you would leave his office more confused than when you walked in.
Oh yeah.
You would ask him a question and he would not have any idea how to do it. So he wanted us to do a video project, right? And he wanted voiceovers. So I go over, is like, hey, how do you do the the voiceovers? I don't know, but you have to do it.
Mhm.
Wait, so you don't know how to do it? He's like,
That's not much help.
that's not much help. He's like, yeah, but you got to do it.
Hmm.
And
Same thing for the class I took.
or the other one was like when he would forget certain directions, and he'd tell you when you turn it in already, when everything was already turned in. So he kept on waffling on whether or not we're going to have a script. So nobody did a script. He only mentioned it once. And he's like, "No, we're not going to do a script. Go to the library, turn it in. I hope everybody has a script ready because it's important." Nobody has it. So everybody lost 10 points on that one.
Yeah, I mean, one of my last semesters, it was either my second to last or my last semester, I was taking microbiology, which obviously isn't in the kinesiology department, so different professors, different everything. But there was some freshman kinesiology majors taking that class, and they had heard that I think it was my last semester, and so they heard I was graduating and were just like asking me some questions about the professors and yada yada. And I was mentioning that story of my first semester, first day experience with mayonnaise. And the microbiology professor had heard me talking to the other ones, and she like came up to me and super concerned, super nice, was like, do you want me to like go talk to your department chair, because that's not appropriate for a professor to be saying to students. And she was the epitome of what a professor should be,
Yeah.
and it was nice to see that in contrast to the condiment.
Yes, he had his struggles. He would brag about his accomplishments. Um,
Which I mean, like, that's awesome he got his PhD, but to then be shitting on other post-bac degrees like a physical therapy degree, like when your PhD was studying PowerPoints, I mean, how fair is that?
yeah, that's not fair at all. He was, and when you look at the reason why he got a PhD, like you're not gonna, you can't help but laugh. Like he got a PhD because what was his PhD on? If you get motion sickness
If
from
we want to get scientifical, it was the effects of PowerPoint motion on the vestibular system.
basically he was saying if you get motion sickness from PowerPoint,
Yep.
that's how he got his PhD.
It's funny that microbiology professor, like, me and her are still really good friends on Instagram now. Like, it's nice to actually had made some connections. And same with like Professor uh Stewart. I was like, can I say her name?
Yeah,
Uh,
I thought she's married now, so I think she changed her name. But
okay, well, Professor Stewart, she was honestly the hands down one of the best professors I ever had. And then I got a TA for her, which was even more great. And then she helped me with my letters of recommendation for grad school. So I feel like even though there were a few professors that made it unnecessarily hard, there were more that uh, outweighed good that outweighed the bad.
yeah, Cassandra was one of my Cassandra Stewart.
Yeah.
She was one of my mentors too.
Mm-hmm.
At class. So Joe, you asked me what class I use the most.
Yeah.
Anatomical kinesis for Cassandra Stewart. That's the one that I use the most because she taught. That's where I really learned how like the body works. I learned about gait there. I learned about
Torque, everything.
torque, everything. Like you learn like
Different types of muscle contractions, like eccentric, concentric.
isometric. You learned it all. It was incredible. It was
And she was so good at teaching it too.
she was great at teaching it. Like she would. she in the first day she would come off as like intimidating, but she was one of the chillest teachers you meet.
Oh yeah, and she really wanted you to like actually learn it. So
Mm.
for example, after the exams, let's say, you know how sometimes there's those multiple choice questions where it's like A, B, or A and B is like the last option.
Yeah,
If you circled A, she would give you like a half point if the
yeah,
question was A and B, you know, like she wanted you to actually learn something as opposed to just make a grade.
yeah. Because if you explained it to her also why you chose it and you gave her a good reason, she would change her. She would change. She would give you those points.
Right, right.
She
And
would
because
also.
that's how physical therapy works. I mean, like, uh, as long as you can justify what you're doing, it makes sense. It's not like there's one right way to do everything.
Absolutely not. And that was one of the. And she was also really cool because she loved doing the festival concerts. So she'd be like, "Oh, I'm not going to be here, you guys," and we're like, "She's going to Coachella."
Yeah, I remember it's a little different, but when I was TAing for her, because she was getting her PhD in education, things called a doctorate of education.
Yeah.
She was doing it online through a school back east, and she had to go defend her thesis. And so she asked me and the other TA to take over the lab for like a week and a half. And I remember feeling so honored that she asked us that.
Yeah, I was she. That was a great class. It was probably, I would say that one and Doctor and the class that you and I were in, therapeutic exercise. Doctor,
Yeah,
that was another one where I learned a lot too.
we're so lucky to have gotten therapeutic exercise in undergrad. Almost
Yes.
everybody I talk to in my cohort right now, so there's 32 of us, and almost none of them had exposure to manual muscle tests, goniometry, any of the stuff that we'd gone over.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah,
there was a lot of stuff that. So yeah, that would, Dr. Moon was Dr. Moon loved me, so I was okay with him. And
he gave me a good hug at graduation.
yeah, he goes. I didn't get a chance to take a picture with him at graduation, and also both of us were. I don't know if you heard Nikki, but the year after the year that I graduated, we were the most lit class of all time. We actually bombarded a bar before the
Um,
ceremony started, including Dr. Moon, Dr. Hughes, and Dr. Boyd. I think was there too.
that's great. I love that.
That's
Oh,
too bad y'all couldn't celebrate together.
yeah, man, I was.
I know. To be honest, I don't think any of my actual friends from San Francisco State were in my graduating class.
Oh man.
They were either like the semester before me, the semester after me, like sucked.
It's. I was like, I was watching you. I was like, I'm so happy for you and my other friend. I was like, I'm so happy. I'm watching you guys on Instagram Live. I'm like, I should be there with you guys. But it was okay, man. The setback is the comeback is always great in the setback, and the year afterwards, we closed that thing down.
I know you guys were the last class for COVID.
Yeah, and also, but the truth is, 20. I joke with my friends all the time that they weren't going to follow us up because they changed the rules. They're like, we're gonna do a ceremony early in the day because last year you guys were too crazy.
Mm.
Oh, so I think so. You remember those steps that when you have to walk up the stairs,
Yes.
when you have to walk up on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody was either passing a pen around because our president was actually really smart about it. He said, "Let's have a smoke machine at the entrance so everybody could pass a pen."
How funny.
So they're passing a pen, or everybody had shots before the show starts. So nobody knew if there were steps behind. There's steps behind, and all you see on the way to the stage is everybody falling over, losing their cap, losing their gown, not their gowns, but their sashes.
Right.
So you're seeing all of this fly all over the place, and then everybody's like picking up by the time we get to the stage.
How funny.
So that was fun to see, and then but I wasn't able to see Dr. Moon that night. And then when he saw me when I came back for my last class, he gave me a huge. He's like, "Congratulations! What are you doing
Right.
here?" I was like, "Just one more class. That's it." But it was a. But that's a statement that department was incredible.
Yeah. I agree.
That department was great. I made great friends out of you. I got Nicci right here. And now look at that. Nicci is part of the Adapt Session family.
I know. I'm so honored to be here, guys.
And this will be the last time we have you. So,
Thank you for jumping on, Nicci.
Yeah, it was fun.
and it wouldn't be the Adapt Session with the guy who leaves the party early to end the show.
Yep, I gotta go, guys. I got shit to do. Let's get out of here.
Sounds good.
Season 2, you guys. We're glad to be back. And have a great day. And
Happy New
oh,
Year.
oh, that's right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And also, we told you we'd get back to the science. We got away from the political stuff for the most part. For
Yeah,
now.
it's about lifestyle though. You got to do what's going on.
Definitely.
So maybe later on we'll get Nicci's opinion on this stuff because she's actually really, like I said, she's really smart. She knows everything.
But I'm really glad that you came on, Nicci, because like Armando's saying, we did want to go back to, health, fitness, get back into the science of things, help educate our people. And what better way than to have somebody who's practicing and in her doctorate program to become a physical therapist to come on here and shed some light on some things.
And for those who don't know, the clients that are listening to this that I've stretched, she's been one of the people that's actually helped you get relief. I've actually gone to Nicci in some of the cases. So
I'm always here to help.
So we got where can they follow you on socials?
Yes.
So my main social would just be Instagram at spt.NicciLashay. Nicci Lashay is NICCILASHAY.
Okay. So you guys can follow Joe at jsaucy25 and at fitness.mindsetca. And mine is, I believe, Armando_J415. It's one of those things.
It's on Adapt's page.
Follow Adapt Session, adapt.session on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. We'll see you guys soon. Happy New
Bye,
Year.
guys. Thank you.